An unsurpassed, penetrating, and perfect Dharma is rarely met with, even in 100,000 million kalpas. Having it to see and listen to, remember and accept, I vow to taste the truth of the Tathagata's teaching.
Now, a brief statement about dana. In Buddhism, when Zen practitioners share their understanding of the teachings and practice, it is offered freely as a practice of dana paramita. Dana is a Pali word that means generosity or to give freely, and this practice is done without expectation of getting something in return. This is the spirit of speaking about the Dharma. Other ways to practice dana is to offer support to those who share the teachings, to support places of spiritual practice, and to give without judgment or expectation when opportunities arise. Those who share the teachings at Great Tree do so on a dana basis. Please support their practice by giving what you can. And you can support Great Tree by going to greattreetemple.org and following the donate path. Our speaker this morning is going to speak on the fourth noble truth, walking side by side. And our speaker is the Reverend Teijo Munnich, abbess and founder of Great Tree Temple. Good morning.
Sorry, you didn't hear me say good morning. Good morning. I forgot what I was saying. This title, walking side by side, comes from something I found in some of one of Katagiri Roshi's books, where he's talking about the word right. And he says there's a couple of different things, a couple of different places where he talks about right. From the first one. Okay, so the first one is the word right. And right, the reason I'm talking about this is because I guess all of you know that the Eightfold Path consists of 8 aspects that have the word right before them. So I think that it's helpful for us to think about the origin of this word when we think about practicing the path. Because as he says in this quote that I'm going to read right now, it's not pointing to the idea of right as opposed to wrong. There's no fixed ideas of what is a right action or right speech and what is wrong action or wrong speech. It's completely according to the situation. So he says the word right isn't fixed on an idea of right and wrong, good and bad. Right means the complete, perfect harmony of the phenomenal world of time, which we create from moment to moment, and the source of existence. Right means the complete, perfect harmony of the phenomenal world of time, which we create from moment to moment. So he's talking about time in a different way, talking about time as something we create moment to moment. And the source of existence, the eternal world of timelessness, where all sentient beings are always interconnected in peace and harmony. So he's talking about the original word that is translated as right. And I have never been able to understand why this word was translated as right, except that perhaps there's not another word, although, as Anne pointed out the other night, I often use the word harmonious. And the reason I use the word harmonious instead of right is because in another part of, actually, it's a different book of his, he says, in Sanskrit, the word for right is sama. Sama means to go along with, to go together, to turn together. It originally comes from a term that means to unite. Right is the state of being in which everything can live together or turn together, united. And to me, you know, describing it in that way describes the way that I kind of have a little visual of this life which we are part of. We're constantly he says everything can live together or turn together, and the translation is to go along with, to go together, to turn together. Just this harmonious movement of moving together. And in order to, and this isn't just moving together with other human beings, it's moving together with all beings, including subtle life forms that we experience as just energy, but recognizing in some way that energy, and that's called awareness. And this is what happens when we do Zazen, this kind of awareness that allows us to just shift with life itself, to just be, to in some way recognize that we are part of all of that, instead of kind of holding to our ideas and our ways of thinking about life. So he said, right is a state of human life in which we live in peace and harmony with all other beings. Right is a state of human life in which we live in peace and harmony with all other beings. Katagiri Roshi used to talk about the purpose of our practice is to learn to live in peace and harmony with all beings. So in terms of talking about the various aspects of the Eightfold Path, and I'd like to remind you, and maybe those of you who didn't hear this, but of the at the beginning of the year when I was talking about the Four Noble Truths, and I saw this video of a talk by Thich Nhat Hanh where he says, just as the fourth noble truth of the Eightfold Path is a way of investigating or noticing or becoming aware of what kinds of things bring about freedom, or the third noble truth, nirvana, or that letting go. What spirit of the activities, of these various activities, can remind us and help us awaken to freedom again and again. Just as that is the case with the fourth noble truth in relation to the third noble truth, it's also true that the second noble truth, if we understand the causes of our suffering, the causes of our lack of freedom, which is really what suffering is. It's attaching to something because we're afraid not to, because we're afraid of impermanence. You know, when my sister, Mary Jo, died, she died very suddenly in 1995. It was a big surprise. because she was very healthy. But when she died, I remember I came back, and it was right after we had finished painting what used to be the Zen Center of Asheville, that little house. And it had just been purchased, and my friends from Japan came to visit, and we painted the whole house, all the walls and trimming and everything. And then my sister died right after that. And so I sort of didn't have, nothing was happening there yet. So I decided to just give myself some space to deal with her death. I felt like I could take about a month to do that. And so I did. And one of the things that kept occurring to me, even as I would wake up weeping or suddenly weep, is that I also recognized that this was an opportunity to know impermanence in a new way, in a way that was not intellectual. Because what it did to me, what death does to me, is it puts me right into the middle of impermanence. When someone dies that's close to you, you all those things that were so important suddenly that you were doing, that you were busy with in your life, most of them become a lot less important, if at all. So you drop it and deal with this person's death. And so I was in that place of having dropped everything for a moment, and including the beginning, starting up of Zen Center. And I just remember thinking so many times, this is a great opportunity to feel what impermanence feels like. But it doesn't take long after you've kind of moved on with your life to lose sight of that and to get very overly engaged in all the other things that we can use as distractions. So I want to talk today just really about the first two, because as I was preparing this talk, I thought, I'm gonna go back and revisit what Katagiri Roshi said about the idea of right. And before I found that, I couldn't remember which book it was in, before I found that discussion that he had about this word, sama, I found a little section on the Eightfold Path. Which one is it in? I don't even know which one it's in. Each moment is the universe. He starts out by saying, Buddha said that to follow the path and experience liberation from suffering, first we have to see in the proper way. Now, this is really the first of the Eightfold Path. He calls it seeing. Sometimes it's called right view. I tend to use the word understanding, right? Understanding. But although those words can be misleading, I guess. But anyway, he's talking about it in terms of seeing in the proper way. Then he explained, he's talking about Buddha. Then he explained how we can liberate ourselves through the activities of speech, conduct, livelihood, effort, having a calmed mind based on meditation, and concentrating the human life force. So these last two that he said, having a calm mind based on meditation, is his way of expressing the aspect called samadhi, which at various times Kagyu Roshi talked about samadhi in different ways. But sometimes he said one-pointedness, which is really the same thing as concentrating the human life force, which is actually how he talks about mindfulness. That's the aspect of mindfulness. All of these kind of merged together at some point. But having a calm mind based on meditation, I think it also points to another way that he expressed it, which is just as oneness, becoming one with. And really, that is where the calm mind comes from. You know, it's interesting to me how I'm very extroverted, so I get drawn into things in life very easily. And when I was preparing, I officiated at a very close friend's funeral this week, as some of you know. And when I was preparing her funeral, she was one of my biggest supporters. She was my biggest supporter in my whole becoming a priest. She spent 3 months with me sewing my okesa, hand stitching and chanting on each stitch. And she took me in several times before I went to Tassajara to help me save money. She invited me to stay with her. When I came back, I stayed with her for a year. I lived with her and her daughter for a year. So, and also when Kagyu Roshi was dying, I needed a place to stay. And she invited me to stay with her at that time. I probably lived in every place she lived in Minneapolis at one time or another. So she was always there to kind of support my practice and my practice as a priest. And so I knew that she had a very deep connection with this practice. And we often talked about her ordaining, but she had this wonderful, beautiful hair that she said she could not ordain because she could not cut her hair. Which I totally get. If I had beautiful hair like that, I probably wouldn't be what I'm doing today. But anyway, I knew she always sort of had it in her heart, and she received Jukai. In fact, we received Jukai, the precepts together in 1977. And so I wanted to make this very meaningful. And I'm very much of the belief that consciousness dissipates as the body comes apart. So those 49 days, I feel like there's still some consciousness there. So I was trying to make this something that would awaken in her the benefits of her practice, her Zazen practice. And so, of course, the heart of a Buddhist funeral for a lay person who considers himself a Buddhist is priest ordination. And in the Soto Zen School Observances book, it talks about how this is because this puts us directly onto the path, the Buddhist path. It doesn't talk about Bardo because Soto Zen doesn't talk about Bardos. That's a Tibetan thing. But basically, to help us stay awake during that period, that Bardo period, which brings up all our fears and things. So I prepared a posthumous ordination ceremony, trying to fix the words so that they would be a little more understandable to all of the Christians in the room. And I gave her a way name. When you're ordained as a priest, you receive a way name in addition to your Dharma name, which you received in Jukai. And so over a period of time, the week before, I had to keep finding time to work on it. And I don't remember everything that was happening, but there was a lot happening that week. And so I would set aside some time, first to work on the ceremony, then to work on, I made her a lineage papers, because you receive separate lineage papers when you receive priest ordination. And that's a big deal for me because, you know, some of it I can't translate on the wrappers. So I just figure it's easier to do it in Japanese, and that's challenging. But anyway, the whole point is that in the midst of the busyness of my stuff that I was doing, every time that I would go back to preparing this ceremony, it's like, it took me back to that place of awareness that I've been talking about recently when I was talking about the Bardos and how we can prepare for death. And I think that this calm mind based on meditation, that, as he calls it here, is those moments that, maybe not even moments, the whole of meditation, including all of our distractions, but that ability to just be with all of that and stay on that cushion, stay on the cushion, just for 40 minutes or whatever, 30 minutes or 25 minutes, to just stay there in the midst of all of this. Somehow there's that experience of, and I remember from the very beginning when I started meditating, when I started doing Zazen, I was in a relationship that constantly created craziness in my mind. But it was also the person that really kind of was into Zazen and Zen and kind of reawakened that in me. I would sit down for 3 minutes or maybe for 5 minutes. If I worked up from 3 minutes to 5 minutes. And it would just be like the whole time, it felt like. But when I stood up, there was a different kind of energy. And I think that was the thing that kept me doing Zazen, that has kept me doing Zazen, is returning to that kind of energy. And it's a kind of energy that allows you to see all of that. It was kind of funny because you can't really see it. It's a different kind of seeing. And this different kind of seeing is really what Katagiri Roshi is pointing to when he's talking about seeing. He talks about the first two of the Eightfold Path as seeing and thinking. In this particular chapter, other places he talks about it as right view, thinking. I can't remember how he uses thinking, but I usually say right understanding, and the second one I say right intention, or harmonious understanding. Harmonious meaning acknowledging the acknowledgement or the awareness of the life, the life that we are part of. And that awareness is not an intellectual awareness. It's that thing I was trying to express about when I would come back to preparing this ceremony. And even to the last, not the last morning, but the second to the last morning, right before we did a vigil in the afternoon. When I was finishing up the wrapper for the Kechimyaku, which has all these different characters on it, I had to put her way name in characters. A couple of times I asked myself, why am I doing this? You know, it seemed like a lot of stuff, you know, just like, who's going to ever see this? You know, probably, I mean, I gave it to her kids, gave them the Kechimyaku, and I said to them, you know, that I was offering it to them and also her Raksu. But if they didn't want it at some point, they could send it back to me and I would ceremonially burn it. And but you know, I thought as I was preparing all of this, well, why am I doing these, you know, some characters and all of this? But at some level, you know, it awakens something in me to draw these characters that have certain meanings and to work with the lineage, you know, which also is not just our ancestors, but whatever it was that caused them to commit themselves to the practice. You know, all of these people who had stories. And some of you have heard some of the stories of my teacher's teacher and his teacher. You know, I'm just knowing that they all have stories, and yet, you know, it feels like this group of folks that are supporting you from the backside, you know, and helping you to go forward. So all of this, you know, it has some kind of meaning, but sometimes when you're engaging in it, you know, this is the nature of spiritual practice. You're kind of like, why am I sitting here and facing a wall? It doesn't make any sense. I've got so much to do. I can remember having times when that's how I felt during Zazen. So he says, put on my glasses. Buddha put seeing and thinking first, because to live in peace and harmony, we have to see and think about life in the proper way. So then he goes on to talk about what is the proper way. Because proper, you know, that's kind of a definitive word. When you see in the proper way, what do you see? You see the nature of time, which is in Japanese is mujo, or impermanence. Seeing impermanence is not to face a kind of nihilism that leads to despair. It's to become yourself as you really are, with joyful, open eyes. And I think open eyes is the key phrase here. It's seeing life outside of our definition, outside of what we call the box in which we have enclosed ourselves with ideas. And oh yeah, I made a little note here, because he says seeing impermanence is not to face a kind of nihilism that leads to despair. It reminded me of when I was teaching a class at Warren Wilson on emptiness, on shunyata. And so at the same time, I was talking about it at the Zen Center of Asheville every week. We used to have talks every Wednesday. So every week I would talk about maybe a particular teaching about emptiness. I was talking about Nagarjuna, I think. Anyway, there was someone a lot of people that were coming very regularly to these talks, and we had some really interesting discussions about it. But one day, somebody who had been coming very regularly came to talk to me, and she said, I think I've had an experience of shunyata, of emptiness. And I said, oh, really? And she described it to me. And I said, yeah, that's an experience from my understanding. And she said, well, I don't like it. So I said, oh, really? Well, what's the problem? She says, well, because I feel like I don't know what's coming next. And it reminded me of when Katakiri Roshi used to talk about, I think this comes from Dogen, about stepping off the top of a 100-foot high pole. And I remember being so terrified by that image. I still don't much like it, but it is that kind of feeling. I remember when we were kids, we used to challenge each other to go off the high dive out at the lake. And I would stand up there sometimes for long times and then change my mind. But when I actually did it, that time between going off and landing in the water, if you've ever done that. and Nyoze talked about it, I think last week, about that period where Tomoe-san sent a card, I guess, to him or his father, thanking them for something around Katakiri Roshi's death. And she said, she was talking about there was a birth and there was a death. And Nyoze was talking about that period in between. And he didn't mention this, and I'm thinking, I wondered if he even knew this, but Katagiri Roshi, the Katagiri's first grandchild was born in January, and Katagiri Roshi died in March, on March 1st. So when he talked about it, I actually went back to that period between when the baby was born and when Katagiri Roshi died. And just that, I don't know, there's a kind of a spaciousness that was present, and of course, this is a bardo, this is one of the bardos in Tibetan Buddhism, but as human life between birth and death. And it's a time, it was a great time of awareness, we were kind of not waiting for death, but expecting death. And at the same time, there was this baby. And just watching Katagiri Roshi interact with his baby. He didn't want to be a grandfather before the baby was born. He said, don't call me grandpa. But when he became a grandfather, it was just like birth and death were merged, they were meeting, and it was quite beautiful. And so this, when you interface with impermanence, when you are really there, like when someone dies, or when you recognize something as, that recognize the impermanence in that big way, like this woman did. Shinzen Young talked at the Zen Center one time. He's a Zen priest too, and he talked about that experience as the dark night of the soul. And when he talked about that, when you really kind of like come up against the fact that you don't know, it's don't know mind, it feels very uncomfortable and scary. And I think this is why Katagiri Roshi talks about seeing impermanence as not to face a kind of nihilism that leads to despair. It is to become yourself as you really are, with joyful, open eyes. So we can choose to sink into the feeling of maybe failure or loss, or we can see the same experience as an opportunity to see in a bigger way, to let go. And so this is, let's see what time is it? Oh, good. So he says, thinking in the proper way is not to understand life through your intellect. It is to contemplate deeply how to live every day based on wisdom. And really that wisdom is the recognition of, or not the recognition of, the awakening to impermanence and allowing ourselves to be in that place of not knowing, of don't know. And also at the same time, and this doesn't come through our intellect, at the same time, experiencing all beings. And through that experience, our actions and our speech. Well, when Roshi talks about activity, he's talking about all of those: speech, effort, action, meditation, mindfulness. I missed something, effort. To do these things in a harmonious way, to do these things moving with, walking with all beings. And he also gets into a whole discussion of mindfulness in relation to this. So, these things get all kind of merged together. But when you see the nature of time, this is from the book about being time, each moment is a universe. When you see the nature of time and understand how impermanence works in your life, how impermanent works in your life, you can use time to cultivate your life and to keep up with the tempo of life without feeling despair and without feeling like you're always behind life. Just being present. That is the basis of a complete way of human life. So this right seeing is also called right view. I call it right understanding. He says, before your mind starts to analyze, accept everything that exists as the contents of your life. So, we get into meditation and we see our mind is really busy and we say, oh, this is not awakening. But when we accept everything that exists as contents of our life, that acceptance is awakening, and it's also calming. And what I was talking about before, when I set aside these times to come back and prepare this ceremony, it brought me back to that calmness. Because when you're working on something like that has some kind of meaning on some deep level, even though your head may be saying, this is goofy. But, this is Japanese. Well, who's going to look at this? Who's going to read this? But that, for me, making Japanese characters, I have to calm my mind in order to do it. But to also at the same time, when you're working on something like this, when you commit yourself to doing this, it causes you to see all of that craziness that your mind is going through. And you can't really just push it aside because It's all happening at the same time, but it helps you to kind of find the calm place in the midst of all of that. When I talk about my name, which means equanimity or right stillness is one of the translations. I always talk about the center of the cyclone is very still. And, this is one of the things that I have discovered about stillness is that it's always present. And all of that commotion is just something we create. Maybe to distract ourselves from the discomfort of impermanence. But at the same time, we're all going to die. And if this whole teaching about the bardos is correct, which totally makes sense, then whatever awareness we cultivate in this lifetime is going to help us when we can't escape anymore. We're just laying there and can't even move our bodies. Open your eyes and see all beings vividly as they really are, right now, right here. All beings. He doesn't say all sentient beings, he says all beings. Open your eyes and see all beings vividly. And in the Tibetan Book of the Dead, it's talking about how our senses become awakened when after we die, after we stop breathing. But it's not, we don't hear in the same way. We don't see in the same way. But yet, all of our senses are awakened. This is what it made me think about. Open your eyes and see all beings vividly, because we really can't see all beings with our eyes as they really are right now, right here. That is called right seeing, the first step to Shakyamuni Buddha's Eightfold Noble Path. And then he says, after that, with a calm mind, profoundly think what you intend to do. So then this is going into right intention, which he calls right thinking. With a calm mind, profoundly think what you intend to do, then whatever it is you do, do it wholeheartedly. And he used to talk about wholeheartedly a lot. And wholeheartedly really is fully, with all, with our whole being, without being pulled away and distracted by something else. Zen is a practice of action. Sometimes people think that Zen practice is a bridge between suffering and happiness. We practice first and then we will be happy, but practice is not a bridge. Practice itself is joy. And really, that's what I was describing. Whatever this practice is, whatever, and the more of those kinds of experiences you have, you've heard us talking, Chimyo and Genyu, Brooke and Genjo, Trey and myself about that experience that we had out at Little Tokyo, out at Zenchuji in Los Angeles. And those kinds of experiences, if you want to completely be part of them, you have to commit yourself and just do it. Just do the whole thing. And in order to do that, you have to let go. Committing really causes us to let go of those things that are constantly pulling us away. So it's something to bring us back, And so he says, practice is not a bridge. Practice itself is joy. And then our practice, every time we go back to it, that joy comes up, even though it may be uncomfortable with what we're doing when we're sitting there. There's a certain kind of underlying joy that comes up when we let go in that way. If you practice Buddha's Eightfold Noble Path of right seeing, thought, speech, conduct, livelihood, effort, mindfulness, and concentration completely, there is egolessness within your practice. Practicing egolessness doesn't mean that you destroy yourself and then something changes in the future. It means that that egolessness comes up simultaneously with the practice itself. And that practice is free from suffering. So the ego is the way that we understand life. The ego is how we've put it all together. But that ego, as I've explained my experience of it in meditation at one point, is that ego can confine us. It can, our definition of life and our way of understanding life can become a box in which we think we have to stay within. But that's only our intellectual understanding of how to navigate life. And of course, we have to have that. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to function. We wouldn't eat, we wouldn't cook, we'd just die. So in order to stay alive, we have to figure out ways to do it. But what happens often is that we call that reality, and that is only part of our reality. So we have to be able to think outside the box and experience what's outside the box, what's outside our definition of life, which is thinking outside the box is kind of egolessness. He goes into bodhicitta. He says, entering Buddha's path is arousing bodhi mind. Bodhi mind is translated as the way mind or way seeking mind. It means the Buddha mind is the way, the right path to be walked, extending in all directions, continuously open to everyone. Buddha mind is the way, the right path to be walked. Well, right, again, harmonious path to be walked, extending in all directions, continuously open to everyone. So as bodhicitta, I was talking a lot about bodhicitta last fall, and I came to the realization that bodhicitta, the bodhicitta that brings us to this practice, and the bodhicitta that keeps bringing us back is really letting go. Bodhicitta is letting go. And when we let go, we experience that everythingness, which is the way I translate shunyata. We experience the everythingness of life, which is constantly changing and rearranging. But, it's not something that we can make happen with our will, that bodhicitta. It's something we have to experience and keep returning to. And that starts with our meditation practice. It starts with our zazen practice. It starts with bringing our mind back to our breath when it goes off, when we notice that it spins off. And then, of course, that translates into our lives. There are moments when we catch ourselves, spinning off and getting caught by fear, getting caught by anger. And when we catch ourselves, maybe we'll remember to take a deep breath. But when we catch ourselves, at least it takes the the momentum of that fear and that anger or what conflict away just for a moment, so that we can experience life a little more clearly and maybe see things from a different perspective. I haven't gotten to what I wanted to get to, But I think I'm going to stop there and maybe continue with this the next time I give a talk, and open it up for a few minutes to any questions or comments that you might have. Dodo?
Well, I've kind of been a big fan of harmony, like in morning service when we chant sanghas bringing harmony to all without hindrance. I'd kind of get a happy feeling like that's that's what it's all about. But lately, I notice how much I seem to disagree with so much in this world. I disagree with how people in my life, the decisions they make. I disagree with how society functions in the ecological sense. I spent my life spending hours taking public transportation just to avoid driving a car. And sometimes I think as Zazen, it's like I'm facing the wall to actually turn away from this society that I disagree with so much. Then we got the political stuff, and I'm just so then I try not to disagree. I feel like I call it caving in, like I'm just giving up, myself. So I'm struggling with how to handle disagreeing with so much. And harmony seems sometimes like I'm missing something in this puzzle. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I know what you mean. It's really a koan, isn't it? Although, my teacher, Harada Seke Roshi from Hoshinji in Japan, he used to always tell us, we needed to find our question. We needed to recognize our question. And one of the things I was thinking as you were speaking is that, well, you really articulated that very well. And that's to be able to identify the question is really an important aspect of it. But then, as Rilke says, then live the question, be with the question, don't put it down. So thank you for reminding us all of what is a koan, probably for most of us. Yeah, go ahead, Bibi.
Well, this is a response to what Cliff was just talking about, and a thought I had is, when we are feeling against something or don't like things, the other side of that is there's a reason why that is, and it's because we're for something. And so because we're for something, we have some value that is a positive. And I'm thinking it could even help to think of our experience in that way, that why is it that I feel this negatively about that? Because I feel positively about this, because this is my aspiration for the world. I have this, there's a positive intention there at the base of that wants things to be better for everyone. And maybe it needn't be a problem. Maybe it can just be learning to be aware of what is the positive basis of that you're experiencing. It's because you have some ideals, some values And you want to, and maybe you're frustrated because you want to actualize them, or you want the world to actualize them. And which can just also bring up the question, well, what am I going to do about that? For my sake and the sake of others. That's, anyway. So this reminds me a little bit, I was living in kind of a communal experience in the 60s, and many of my roommates were, you know, people were against a lot of things in those days. I remember asking one of them, well, it's very clear what you're against, but what are you for? And of course, they were for a lot of very important things. And we can forget that sometimes in our own experience and motivation, in our seeing things we don't like. There's a reason for that. And maybe we need to actually recognize that and maybe even cherish that we have that vision. Anyway, that's my response. What do you think, Cliff?
Oh, that was helpful. Yeah. Negatives really just the mere side of the positive. So
I think it's also important to remember that all beings want to be happy. And one of the things I was thinking, Phoebe, as you were talking, is how, you know, we want the same things a lot of times, but just it's a question of how we go about it. But there's underlying fears, and there's underlying things that create conflict, that create differences in how we approach things. So, you know, there's a whole lot of layers to go through in order to kind of get to that, to the heart of what it is that we all want. When we used to do conflict resolution with Kyoki at the Zen Center of Asheville, she used to always help us to see that, you know, even that in these conflicts, that once you get to the what the fears are on both sides, you realize that you both have fears and you both have the same goal. And then she said she used to do mediation with, you know, farmers and the banks that were foreclosing on them and things like that. And she said once they got to that level, you know, it was very easy to come up with a resolution. And she was talking about, you know, checking the guns at the door and things. So it was a very volatile situation. But it was really true when we would play out these little scenarios, you know, you'd really get into your part. But when you get beyond the fears, then there was a possible conversation there. But I see that it's 11 o'clock and I want to try and end. We'll do that ending, giving back the merit, and I'll give 3 vows. I'll do 3 vows. May the merit of this practice.
May the merit of this practice
Benefit all beings.
benefit all beings.
And bring peace.
And bring peace.